And here's what the gentleman from Maryland said, the law professor that Thomas Jefferson would understand. But the Constitution that Thomas Jefferson signed said the Congress shall have power to exercise exclusive legislation in all cases whatsoever over such district.
Alas, I do have to correct my friend in his history, because there might be some students watching this. Thomas Jefferson never signed the Constitution. He was, of course, on a diplomatic mission when the Constitution was being signed in Philadelphia, but he did write the Declaration of Independence.
Australia, Canada, France, Indonesia, Ireland, Germany, Mexico, Spain, and the United Kingdom ask about citizenship in their respective censuses. Is the United States to be the only North American country not to inquire about citizenship in its census protocols?
Mr. Chairman, we strongly oppose this legislation as unconstitutional and unwise. It dishonors our own history and the values of the nation, and I will reserve at this point.
I'll tell you what, Mr. Speaker, what is an insult. An insult is to the American people, the citizens that live here, whose voice, whose vote is being degraded because of the horrendous immigration problem that we have at our southern border through illegal aliens coming across the border and not being addressed here in Washington, D.C. One of the lesser acknowledged issues, but equally alarming as a result of the population coming across the border illegally, is the effects of this administration's failure to secure the southern border, is the illegal immigration population's influence in America's electoral process. Our democracy depends on accurate representation and electoral integrity. Voting is a coveted privilege held by American citizens, and elected representatives are responsible for serving the interests of the voters in their district. But even if not a single illegal alien casts a vote, the mere presence of illegal immigrants in the United States is having a profound impact on the outcomes of elections, skewing the representation of Americans. Mr. Bigg points out that the U.S. Constitution mandates that a census be carried out every 10 years, where everyone who is present in the United States, regardless of their citizenship and immigration status, is counted. But the Constitution does not specify whether non-citizens or illegal aliens must be counted for the purpose of apportioning House seats. You may recall that in 2016, President Trump, through executive order, added a citizenship question back to the 2020 census. The same question that had been legally asked on nearly every census since 1820 until it was removed in 1960. Not because there was anything found wrong with that question, but because the effect of illegal immigration was negligible at that time. But there's no doubt today, Mr. Speaker, that the effect of illegal immigration is significant. And I won't waste my time making that case here. We all know it. It's a top concern of about 70% of all Americans. Though common sense dictates that only citizens should be counted for apportionment process, illegal aliens have nonetheless recently been counted towards the final tallies that determine how many House seats that each state is allocated and the number of electoral votes that it will wield in presidential elections. And since the illegal alien population is not evenly distributed through the nation, American citizens in some states are losing representation in Congress to illegal aliens in other states.
Since 1790, all persons have been included in the census, in every census, on a decennial basis since the beginning of the Republic. The Supreme Court rejected the theory that's being advanced by my friends in the majority today in Evanwell versus Abbott, that the Constitution requires citizens rather than persons. The gentleman from North Carolina invites us to think this has something to do with immigration. We actually had an immigration deal coming out of the Senate for hundreds of new Border Patrol officers and asylum officers and asylum judges and fentanyl detection machinery, and it was vetoed by the fourth branch of government, Donald Trump, who said he didn't want a border solution. He wanted a border crisis to run on. So despite the fact that Senator Lankford, perhaps one of the most conservative senators that we have in the Republican Party, said that this was a great deal and the best that he'd ever seen coming out of the Senate, despite the fact that Senator McConnell was for it, they blew it all up. So you judge for yourself the seriousness of the claims that they want to do something about immigration.
As chair of the Hispanic Caucus, I rise today to oppose H.R. 7109. It's a bill that threatens equal and fair representation of immigrant communities. This bill requires a citizenship question on the U.S. Census, which directly undermines the Constitution's mandate for a fair and accurate count of all residents. This requirement would deprive tens of millions of immigrants their rightful access to representation and resources, even though they pay taxes and contribute to our economy. A citizenship question would have a chilling effect on participation in the census. Its accuracy would be destroyed. The census count affects the federal government and the amount it appropriates funds and resources to our communities. Republicans are effectively saying, if you're not a citizen in this country, you don't count. Even legal permanent residents, you don't count. This is absurd. Let me be clear. Immigrants are the backbone of this economy. They work the fields, they build our cities, and they contribute tirelessly to the fabric of our society. They pay over $500 billion in taxes, including taxes for Social Security and Medicare, even though undocumented immigrants can't receive benefits. Yet, despite their invaluable contributions, Republicans want to deny immigrant communities access to even more vital services and resources that they help fund through their hard-earned tax dollars. As representatives of the people, it is our duty to ensure that all members of our communities are treated with dignity and respect. Every individual, regardless of their immigration status, should have the opportunity to thrive. But H.R. 7109 does the opposite. A citizenship question on the census threatens to further marginalize immigrant communities. An undercount of the immigrant population would not only result in an unfair distribution of resources, but it will also undermine the very foundation of our democracy. That's fair representation from our government. I want to urge our colleagues to reject this extreme Republican bill and instead focus on policies that uplift and empower all members of our society.
It took 240 years to accumulate 30 million illegals living in the United States. In 4 short years, President Biden, under his policies, will have added 15 million. Talking about 45 million illegals persons living in the United States, that's the equivalent to 60 congressional seats. Now, most of those illegal aliens will be drawn to live primarily in sanctuary states and cities. This thwarts the fair representation of American citizens in the House of Representatives, foundationally altering our representative republic. This important piece of legislation enables us to fairly and accurately apportion congressional districts based upon equal representation of American citizens. I urge my colleagues to seek the truth and to support this bill. I yield.
I rise to oppose H.R. 7109. I mean, think about it. It's another Republican attempt to attack immigrant communities in this country. So many of us are children, grandchildren of immigrants, and we have the hypocrisy to stand in this room here and continue to attack immigrant communities. Republicans are trying to amend the Constitution through unconstitutional means. The Census Bureau has constitutionally mandated responsibility to count the number of persons in the United States, to count every single person. Because as the member prior from this side said, they are here, they're contributing, they are paying taxes. They make it possible for us to be able to retire and then be able to have the benefits that we've worked so hard because they're paying those taxes and they serve our communities. Republicans are adding census questions to have a chilling effect, to keep people afraid, to make them nervous, to discourage their participation in the census. And the ultimate effect that it's going to have on these communities like mine is undercounted and underrepresented. Our democracy grows weaker every single time these kind of actions are brought to this floor. We must ensure that the census remains as accurate as possible and free from the political interference that would be robbing whole communities of the resources and the representation they are entitled to. I encourage strongly a no vote, and I yield back to the ranking member.
I think it's fairly obvious that when we take a census, there are certain questions you expect to appear on the census, right? And one thing, we want to know whether you're a permanent citizen here or whether you are not a citizen. And there's a difference between the two. There's a reason why we swear certain people in as citizens. There's a reason why we treat citizens different than other people. And I think it's absolutely bizarre that to this point we have been sending out census forms and not asking the first question that you would figure would pop into your head. Are you a citizen? It's kind of embarrassing it hasn't happened up to this point. We have another problem in that there's some states declaring themselves sanctuary states or some sanctuary cities in which they seem to be encouraging people to come here who really shouldn't be in the country at all.
I rise today in strong opposition to H.R. 7109, the Equal Representation Act. The U.S. Constitution requires a count of the whole number of persons in each state. Counting every person has been the legal, historical, and constitutional practice ever since the first census conducted in 1790. A citizens-only census, as this legislation intends, is reckless, cynical, and frankly illegal. It is not the Census Bureau's job to keep track of immigration status. It is also not the Census Bureau's job to determine one's allegiance, just like the insurrectionists on January 6th. We have agencies for both of those tasks. The census guides more than $2.8 trillion a year in federal funding and is distributed to states, cities, and towns. This includes funding for Medicare, Medicaid, schools, roads, and other critical public services. And not counting every whole person may decrease federal money, even in some of my colleagues' districts. Non-citizens make up about 6.7% of our nation's population of 333 million people. They are our loved ones, friends, neighbors, and those who've been actively contributing to and participating in our communities for many years. Pretending that non-citizens do not live in our communities, and that's exactly what this bill would do, pretend, will only instill fear, force people into the shadows, and take critical federal funding away from the areas that need it the most.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today in support of H.R. 7109, the Equal Representation Act. This legislation will require U.S. citizens to include a question that asks if the person is a United States citizen. Just a question. This bill passed through the House Oversight Committee on a straight party line vote, 22-20, and not a single Democrat supported it. The census informs how our government divides up congressional districts and electoral college votes. Mr. Speaker, it helps to ensure American voters have equal representation, American voters. That process should not factor in people who are not citizens or not eligible to vote. You can see why my Democrat colleagues would have a problem with this bill. Factoring illegal aliens into the process skews things in their favor. In fact, it wasn't very long ago that a member of the minority party was on the news claiming that they wish that more illegals would come to their district for the census. If the census does not include the citizenship question, states with more illegal aliens will get more congressional districts and more electoral college votes. We have a history of saying that elections are sacred and that free, fair, and secure elections are the cornerstone of this great republic, Mr. Speaker. It's time to act like it and prioritize the dadgum representation of our people. Americans are sick and tired of this administration weaponizing different parts of our government, and they don't want to see something like the census being used against them, when it's so hard, in fact, to get American citizens to even take the census. Leaders in states like California and New York are taking pride in harboring illegal aliens. In fact, the people of California have offered free health care to their illegals, and New York has kicked combat veterans, Mr. Speaker, combat veterans out of housing to house illegals.
The gentleman's time has expired.
I yield him 10 more seconds.
The gentleman's recognized for 10 seconds.
They should not be rewarded with more congressional seats, Mr. Speaker, or electoral college votes, which would end up distorting the will of the American people. I'd like to thank my colleagues, Congressman Warren Davidson and Congressman Chuck Edwards, for introducing this legislation. I'm proud to support it.
If we were being cynical politically, we would embrace this legislation because it's the red states like Texas and Florida whose congressional delegations are inflated by virtue of counting people who are not citizens. We're simply trying to follow what the Constitution says, which I know is kind of a radical proposition around here these days.
This bill will violate our Constitution, which states that all persons be counted in the census. Instead of wasting time on deeply unserious messaging bills, Congress should be focused on what really matters to the American people, particularly reproductive freedoms. Right now, across the country, women are suffering from extreme abortion bans that are endangering their health and limiting their ability to make private medical decisions. Women in America are worried about their reproductive freedoms and deeply concerned about what extremist politicians will attack next. We know that radical judges and politicians are not stopping with abortion bans. They're now attacking fertility treatments and attempting to restrict birth control methods like Plan B and IUDs. If far-right extremists really cared about women, they would want to make the full range of birth control readily available, not restrict access to it. This Sunday is Mother's Day. How about giving moms and potential moms the gift they really want, the right to decide whether, when, and with whom to have children? Instead of flowers, let's guarantee the right to use the full range of FDA-approved birth control.
Right now, our nation is grappling with a border crisis that has been manufactured by Democratic policies that brazenly reward those that break our laws to enter our country illegally. My home state of New York is drowning due to policies that transformed our state into a sanctuary for illegal immigration. Democratic leaders in New York City, Albany, here in Congress, and the White House, they have turned their back on lawful Americans, choosing instead to roll out the red carpet for illegal immigrants with housing, clothing, financial incentives, all paid for by the American taxpayers. The gravy train's alive and well. Through this process, we're learning that it's a calculated effort to boost their own political power by inflating their population counts and skewing congressional representation. We're talking millions of people who are not American citizens having a major say in American elections. They're not even hiding it anymore. One of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, who happens to represent New York City in this body, openly called for more illegal immigration for her district because she says she, quote, needs more people in her district for redistricting purposes. This absurd notion pushed by my colleagues across the aisle that these non-citizens should shape the future of our nation is completely unconstitutional. They are corroding the essence of American citizenship, turning it into a political commodity. The Equal Representation Act is our line in the sand. It is time to end the charade by rewarding states like New York and California for this reckless sanctuary antics that undermine our laws. I urge my colleagues to rise above partisan manipulation, protect the sanctity of our democracy, and support the Equal Representation Act. Let's send a clear message that the value of American citizenship is absolute, and our elections are not for sale.
I rise in support of the Equal Representation Act, which will add a citizenship question to the census and exclude illegal aliens from the apportionment base. It is past time we put America and Americans first. Joe Biden and his regime are shelling out benefits to illegal immigrants like Oprah Winfrey on her show. Everyone gets a vote. Everyone gets recognized, even if you're here illegally. In New York, aliens are receiving $53 million in free prepaid debit cards. In Denver, Colorado, aliens get 6 free months of housing. And now they want to hand them seats in Congress to buy their lifelong allegiance to the Democrat Party. Since Biden took office, we have seen more than 9 million illegal aliens cross our borders and more than 1.8 million gotaways evade Border Patrol agents. That is larger than the population of 32 states, Mr. Speaker. There are now at least 16.8 million illegal aliens living in the United States, enough to account for roughly 22 seats in the House of Representatives. Including these aliens in the apportionment of congressional districts impacts representation in Congress and undermines the constitutional principle of one person, one vote. Americans deserve to have their voices fully represented, not diluted by illegal aliens. I'm proud to be a co-sponsor of this legislation, and I urge my colleagues to vote in favor of this bill. Mr. Speaker, I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I want to simply explain what we're talking about here. You could have a citizen of Russia that illegally crosses our southern border, pays cartels, comes across our southern border, and decides to set up shop in California. That citizen of Russia that can still vote for Vladimir Putin all day long also is counted in the distribution of electoral votes in the United States, therefore having influence, therefore shaping who is president of the United States. I don't know what else could possibly be foreign interference in elections than what we're talking about today. Mr. Speaker, I'm from the state of Louisiana. We have 6 members of Congress. We have 6. By some calculation, the state of California alone has 6 members of Congress entirely attributable to citizens of other countries, therefore just offsetting all of the votes and all the citizens in Louisiana. This is outrageous to listen to people across the aisle talk about how this is inappropriate. No, this is exactly appropriate. This is exactly appropriate. As a matter of fact, the way that we count American citizens in our territories, you are giving a greater status to an illegal alien in the United States, a citizen of a foreign country, than you're giving to an American citizen. This is absolutely outrageous to listen to people to try and argue and justify this. This is 100% about stacking the vote, about foreign interference in elections, about incentivizing sanctuary cities. That's what this does. It actually takes American taxpayer dollars through the formula funding influenced by the census, and it gives it to states that have illegal aliens. This is completely outrageous. I can't even believe we're standing here having this debate. Vote yes if you want Americans to be represented, and vote no if you think Russians and Chinese and others should be represented.
That's a lot of words from the opposition to this bill to say that citizenship does not matter. That's basically their argument. We don't care if you're a citizen. In fact, they are encouraging you to not be a citizen. Sanctuary cities and states invite everyone from the world to flood their cities, and they need it. They've said as much in interviews that their population is fleeing their horrible policies in states like California, Illinois, Maryland, and elsewhere, New York, and they're going to places that have more freedom and less government. So what do? They import new people who don't know better. And yes, the conditions are better there than the places they're fleeing. But as my colleague, Mr. Graves, was pointing out, California's got 6 to 7 members. That's more than many of our states. Yes, Texas has representatives because they too have a large illegal population. And the Biden administration is doing everything possible to prevent them from stopping this invasion of our country. It is willfully and purposefully, and I will add skillfully, undermining the value of U.S. citizenship to flood this country with non-citizens. And I want to tell you some great news to my colleagues. Foreign nationals do have representation in the United States at embassies or consulates. Their representative is not here in the United States Congress. I represent United States citizens, and so do my colleagues. But the non-citizens do not vote, and they should not vote. But don't let that stop them. They're working to change that too so that they can vote. We found that non-citizens are voting, and they've found loopholes to do that with motor voter. We have to defend the value and right of U.S. citizens. And the only way to do that is to do the very purpose of the census, is to apportion representatives. Now, we get a lot of other ancillary benefits from the census, but the constitutional purpose of it is to know who is here.
Now, they want to know everything else about you, how many hyphens you have in your ethnicity, national origin, what you believe about your religion, how much you make, every other way they can invade your privacy, but they don't give a rip whether you're a United States citizen.
If you went out on the street today and you asked someone anybody on the street, say, you know, we do a census every 10 years, we count up the number of people in the country. Do you think it's okay if we find out how many of those are citizens? That person would say, well, yeah, but aren't you already doing that? That's what they would think. All this bill says is let's count persons, like the Constitution says, let's count everyone, but let's also find out how many are citizens, because that's what should determine how congressional representation, how apportionment is done. It is so darn simple. By the way, to my good friend from Maryland on the other side, we ask all kinds of other questions on the census anyway. What's wrong with asking sort of the fundamental question, are you a citizen of this great country, the greatest country ever? That's all this does. And that is important number to get, important information to get when you're figuring out who's going to represent how many congressional members from each of the respective states. This couldn't be more simpler. I don't know why they're opposing it, but they always do. I urge a yes vote and yield back.